Some encounters are like seeds carried by the wind, so small and unassuming that you never anticipate the roots they will sink into your soul. A single question from a child, asked under a canopy of trees on a lazy Sunday, was all it took to alter the course of my carefully quiet existence. This is the story of how a simple life became beautifully, irreversibly complicated.
My name is Tina, and my world is deliberately small. I tend to a modest floral boutique, a sanctuary of petals and fragrance where time moves slowly. The shop is rarely bustling, yet it breathes with an undeniable vitality. I find solace in arranging blossoms and exchanging gentle pleasantries with the occasional customer. It is a tranquil rhythm, and I am content within it. One Sunday, bathed in golden warmth, I retreated to the park, my usual haven of solitude. Towering oaks provided a patchwork of shade, and the air hummed with the melody of sparrows. Families dotted the landscape. Children's laughter echoed across the grass. I settled onto a familiar bench beneath a sprawling maple, tilting my face toward the drifting clouds.
Then a tiny presence materialized before me, a girl with inquisitive, luminous eyes and chestnut hair stood silently at my knees. She could not have been older than 5. Her gaze was steady, expectant. When she finally spoke, her words sliced through the tranquil afternoon with startling clarity. "Will you be my mommy?" I was utterly unprepared. My lips parted, but my voice had abandoned me. A strange cocktail of disbelief and something unnamed pulsed through my veins. I scanned the park frantically, searching for a frantic parent, a hidden camera, anything to explain this surreal moment. But the child simply waited, her expression brimming with innocent hope. Seconds later, a man sprinted toward us, his features tight with concern. He was tall, with hair as dark as charcoal. He gently seized the girl's hand. "Sophie, what are you doing?" His cheeks flushed crimson as he turned to me. "I am so sorry. She has a habit of doing this." His name was Jim. He apologized profusely, his embarrassment palpable. I managed to murmur that it was fine, though my pulse refused to settle. They departed swiftly, hand in hand. I remained on the bench as the park reclaimed its serenity, but my thoughts refused to follow suit. The child's question lingered, an echo I could not silence. It had been an odd, disorienting Sunday. I returned home, yet the memory of that fleeting encounter clung to me like the scent of rain. 2. In the weeks that followed, the universe seemed intent on orchestrating reunions. My visits to the park began to intersect with Jim and Sophie's with uncanny regularity. It was never planned, yet there they were. Sophie's face would ignite with recognition, and she would race toward me as though I were a long-lost friend. Her enthusiasm was infectious, wrapping around my heart like a gentle embrace. Her attachment deepened with each encounter. She was a spirited child, yet tender in her affections. Her small fingers would intertwine with mine as we meandered along shaded paths or paused to observe a cardinal's flight. Occasionally, she presented me with treasures, a polished pebble, a crayon sketch depicting 3 smiling figures linked hand in hand. Those drawings never failed to stir a profound warmth within me. I felt, somehow, essential to her small universe. One afternoon, Jim settled onto the bench beside me
while Sophie chased butterflies. He offered a tentative smile. "She's truly taken with you, Tina," he said quietly. "It's wonderful to witness her so joyful." His words invited reflection. This connection felt significant, a quiet weaving of threads that might one day form an intricate tapestry. I glanced at Sophie, then back at Jim. Despite his smile, there was a weariness in his posture, a shadow beneath his eyes. An unspoken question surfaced. "She's a lovely child," I said carefully. "Where is her mother?"
The atmosphere shifted instantly. His smile dissolved, replaced by a fleeting anguish. He lowered his gaze to his hands. "Her mother," he began, his voice barely audible. "She left us." He offered no elaboration. The sentence hung in the air, heavy with unspoken grief and mystery. I could almost feel the ache radiating from him. The park, once so vibrant, seemed to dim. Sophie's call broke the tension. Jim rose swiftly, grateful for the interruption. I watched him walk toward her, burdened by a sorrow I could not yet comprehend. My thoughts remained tethered to them long after they vanished from view.
3. One afternoon, Jim appeared at my shop. He looked utterly depleted, paler than I had ever seen him, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. His shoulders slumped as he approached the counter. "Tina," he began, his voice strained. "I hate to impose, but I have nowhere else to turn. Sophie is distraught today. She's been asking for her mother, and now she's asking for you. I have a critical work obligation this evening, and every sitter I've contacted is unavailable." He paused, desperation flickering across his features. "Could you possibly watch her, just for a few hours?" I hesitated only briefly. His worry was tangible, and Sophie's tear-streaked face materialized in my mind. "Yes, Jim," I replied softly. "I'll come." That evening, I crossed the threshold of their home for the first time. The residence was far grander than I had anticipated, a stately house nestled among whispering elms. Inside, the rooms were spacious and immaculate, yet an unsettling stillness pervaded the air. It was a house that lacked the warmth of constant occupancy. Sophie greeted me at the door, enveloping my waist in a fierce embrace. Her delight was palpable. We settled onto the plush sofa, and she retrieved a hefty photograph album. She narrated each image with earnest enthusiasm. Jim at the beach, Sophie's first birthday, a vacation in the mountains. Then, a particular photograph arrested my attention. Jim, Sophie, and a striking woman stood together in a blooming garden, all laughing. Sophie pointed a small finger at the woman. "This isn't my real mom," she stated matter-of-factly, her gaze steady and serious. My chest tightened. I was uncertain how to respond to such an unexpected declaration, so I simply clasped her hand. We spent the evening immersed in play and storybooks. Sophie chattered about her classmates, her favorite crayon color, the squirrel she had named Mr. Whiskers. Time dissolved. When Jim finally returned near midnight, the quiet click of the lock punctuated the stillness. His fatigue was evident, but a genuine smile softened his features upon finding Sophie peacefully asleep, her head pillowed on my lap. He gathered her carefully, cradling her against his chest as he carried her upstairs. When he descended, he stood before me, gratitude radiating from every line of his face. "Tina," he said, holding my gaze, "you saved me tonight. I don't know how to repay you. You're so good with her.
I don't know what I'd do without you. His sincerity kindled a deep, unfamiliar warmth within me. This was no mere favor or obligation. Something substantial was taking root, a connection that felt less like convenience and more like destiny. 4. It was a hectic Tuesday morning at the boutique. I was arranging a bouquet of crimson roses when a newspaper headline seized my attention. Billionaire CEO's divorce finalized. Beneath the bold print was a photograph I recognized instantly. It was Jim. My heart plummeted. Jim? A CEO? I devoured the article, my mind struggling to reconcile this revelation with the man I knew. James Anderson, head of a multinational corporation, recently divorced from a renowned actress. The disparity was staggering. My thoughts churned. Why had he concealed this? He had always seemed so unassuming, so ordinary. A cocktail of shock and resentment brewed in my chest. I needed answers. That evening, Jim called to request my help with Sophie again. I agreed, though my voice lacked its usual warmth. When he arrived, I confronted him directly. "Jim," I said, "I saw the newspaper today." His expression faltered. Guilt and sorrow flickered across his face. "Oh, Tina," he murmured, "I wanted to tell you. I was afraid." We sat down and he unraveled the truth. He was exhausted by the relentless scrutiny of fame. He craved anonymity, authenticity, to be valued for who he was, not for his fortune. My quiet world, he confessed, offered a refuge from the noise. I listened, and as he spoke, my indignation gradually dissolved. I began to perceive the weight he carried, the isolation of wealth, the loneliness of constant performance. And beneath my empathy, another sentiment began to blossom. It was subtle at first, then undeniable. I was developing feelings for him, not gratitude or pity, but something deeper, something that felt permanent. 5. One tranquil evening, Sophie and I were immersed in a board game. Her laughter ricocheted off the walls, infusing the house with rare warmth. She presented me with a new drawing, a sun with a smiling face, a house, and 3 figures holding hands. My heart swelled. Then the doorbell shattered the peace. Sophie's smile evaporated. I rose slowly, apprehension coiling in my stomach. When I opened the door, a woman stood before me, impeccably dressed, her hair a cascade of polished waves, her expression cold and imperious. "I'm here for my daughter," she announced, her voice sharp as fractured glass. It was Jim's ex-wife. Sophie whimpered and darted behind me, her small fingers digging into my clothing. Her entire body trembled. Jim appeared at the top of the stairs, his face draining of color. "What are you doing here?" His voice was taut, restrained. The woman emitted a brittle laugh. "I'm here for Sophie. Surely you didn't think I'd stay away forever." "You left her," Jim shot back, his tone raw. "You abandoned us. You have no claim here." Their confrontation escalated into a volatile exchange, voices clashing like cymbals. I stood paralyzed, caught in the tempest of their fractured history. Sophie pressed her face against my hip, hiding from the woman who was, by blood, her mother. All I wanted was to shield her from the ugliness. The air grew thick with unresolved resentment, and I felt utterly powerless. 6.
The aftermath was merciless. The media descended like locusts. My identity was unearthed, dissected, and distorted. Paparazzi staked out my apartment and my shop. My sanctuary had become a spectacle. I was drowning. Anxiety coiled around my chest, relentless and suffocating. My concentration fractured. I felt perpetually on edge, as though my nervous system had been rewired for constant alert. Jim recognized my deterioration. He approached me with a proposal, a strategy born of desperation. "Tina," he said quietly, "we need to control the narrative. Give them a story before they fabricate one of their own, a fake engagement. It will redirect the attention, protect Sophie from the chaos." I recoiled at the notion. Deception was antithetical to my nature. But then I envisioned Sophie's terrified face, her whispered pleas. She needed stability. She needed peace. Reluctantly, I acquiesced. We performed our roles flawlessly. We attended galas, clasped hands beneath blinding flashes, and projected the image of a couple madly in love. Jim was a pillar of composure beside me, and sometimes in those orchestrated moments, the boundary between performance and reality blurred. When his fingers intertwined with mine, a genuine flutter stirred in my chest. It was intoxicating and confusing. But after each event, the crash was inevitable. Exhaustion engulfed me. My mood plummeted. I questioned my own motives, my capacity to endure this elaborate masquerade. Yet each time I faltered, I recalled Sophie's smile, and I pressed on.